Hello everyone and welcome to another Thursday. That means it's Gear Talk time. So no grandiose opening or anything. This is pretty much like a continuation I made a few videos ago. I can't remember the exact video it was in, but it was talking about Maria's photo that was taken and also talking about the order of how canonicity works in Gears of War. So I figured now that 13 Days of Halloween's done, we're in November, I figured I could actually go into that a little deeper and talk about some other things that are either canon or non-canon, or things that disprove the other, and figured, why not get that out of the way, since that is also on my list as of when I made that video. Figured I'd just get it done with. So, yeah, we're going to talk about the canonicity today of the Gears of War events, Gears of War stories, Gears of War characters, things that happened, things that were said, and break it down and educate those who don't know about what is canon, what is not canon, and what supersedes the other. It's important to start off with saying what is and what isn't canon, or at least the order it goes in is a better way to say, because there are things that negate other things. So the order it starts off with is it goes games, and after the games it goes into the books. After the books it goes into the comics. Now the reason for this order is that the comics have a lot more liberty to go around and do other things that kind of negate other things in the books and also in the games. Now, even though you have people like Karen Travis from the books and Joshua Ortega, who was involved with the comics, both of them also wrote for Gears of War. So they also kind of automatically make it so that the comics and books are canon. Now, Joshua Ortega is not the only one who did the comics, but it is important to state that he kind of makes it so that you can't argue that things are canon. So that's the order we're going to go by today for games. Then we're going to go books. Then we're going to go by the comics to decide what isn't canon, or what kind of overrules the other. Starting off, going deeper into what we talked about before for Maria's photo. Now, talking about Maria's photo that was taken, the one that Dom carries around, it's important to state there are two moments in the story where it is brought up how the photo came to be. The first one starting off with, in the books, you have it where Dom and Maria are out together over at a bar, just having a date night together, and it just so happens that Carlos, Dom's brother, is also there. At the bar, those two are together, and that's where Carlos takes the photo, and that's how we have the photo. Now, in the comics, it's stated within the untitled comic that Dom is in, that's hard as ever to find online, but I've got it in paperback, that they ended up renting out their house. They got their first house that they're renting, and Marcus is there, and Marcus is the one, they line up in front of the house, and he's the one that takes the photo. Marcus is the one that takes the photos. Well, if we're going by the order of events, because of how much of a role that the books play into the games, as we learn in 3, the books outweigh the comics. So when it comes to that, it is stated pretty much that Carlos is the one who took the photo. Unless something is stated later on when it comes to the games, like if they do state Marcus did it, well, there's enough evidence at that point to point to it being Marcus instead. But as it stands right now, the photo with Maria and Dom was taken by Carlos when they were out at the bar when Dom was on leave. Next up, we have Marcus and the Cantus. If anyone's wondering what this is, this goes back to Gears of War 2. In this situation, they first come across the Cantus. We're first introduced to them when we play Gears of War 2. And this is where Marcus says, like, what the hell is that thing? Dom is like, I don't know what that is. Both of them see a Cantus, and they have no clue what they're looking at. So the reason that this is such a big thing, and this was a hot button issue online for a while, even when you get to Judgment, this is brought back up because Marcus is in Judgment, that, what do you mean for 14 years Marcus has never once come across a Cantus? Pretty much the medical and stronger division of the Locust. What do you mean he's never once seen them? And there really isn't an argument to make for it, because you would say yes, like there has to be something that points to it. Not really. Aside from Judgment, when we're following Baird and Cole throughout it, we do have Marcus on the speaker at one point, but Marcus is only talking about something going on. He never references anything else except the situation he's in. So as far as we can tell, Marcus never came across a Locust at Halvo Bay that just so happened to be a Cantus. He never once did it. Now, benefit of the doubt, he was in prison for 2 years, but at the same time, it's like, that means he had 12 years to come across a Cantus. Like, I looked through it in the books, in the comics, it's never referenced at all that he ever saw one. So I have to assume the entire time up until they went to the Hollow, Marcus and Dom never once came across a Cantus that ever made them aware of the fact that there was something other than grunts and boomers and Rom that were running around the place. Next up, we got the chainsaw bayonets. Now, the reason this one's such a big thing is because we have Judgment that exists. And Judgment takes place before the chainsaw bayonets were invented. Now, the reason the bayonets were invented is because of the fact that Ty and Marcus were fighting off locusts at the time. They weren't doing anything to him. Marcus got pinned down at one point, like physically pinned down by a locust that was going to kill him. Ty came in with a circular saw because it's a long story. They were near a hardware store when this happened, and took it and ran it right through the locust and killed him. When the information was passed back over in debriefing to Adam Phoenix, he came up with the idea, we'll put the chainsaws on the guns so they can saw through, because we may not be able to stab them that well, but we can cut through them. So that's how the chainsaw bayonets came to be, and that happened a little bit after or even during 1 AE within a year in the war. Halvo Bay happens roughly 6 weeks after E-Day, so the chainsaw bayonet idea was never even a thing, didn't even exist. Now, in the game, they say they were prototype guns and everything, but this is one of the only times, and I can only think of maybe 3 or 4 times that the games are discredited, where it is openly stated in information, in interviews, that the chainsaw bayonets were put in just because we're not going to make a Gears of War game without the chainsaw bayonets on a gun. We're not going to do it. So, it's in there just for player enjoyment. That's the only reason that they're put. Canonically, by the story, because the books, they talk about Baird and Cole, before they go to Halvo and after they go to Halvo, it does never state anything about the chainsaw bayonets. So the chainsaw bayonets in Judgment did not exist. They were just there for funsies. As for the epilogue, they did exist. That's why they are there. The epilogue with the chainsaw bayonets is more canonical than anything else. Next up, I have here Barrick and Jace's relationship. Now, the reason this is brought up is because we go to the comics. In the comics, we have a situation where pretty much we have Dom, Marcus, Jace, and later on they're looking for survivors, and they find Barrick. They all come together, and it's the situation they find Barrick, and Jace and Barrick don't really have any sort of, banter or talk or anything with one another. They act like they'd never met before. So the reason for this one is, and the game's technically superseded by a bit, so this will be the canonical thing. They already did know each other. We just have to assume maybe at this point that they have been in missions together, they've done things together. This isn't their first, second, third, fifth, 100th time together. Maybe they just came across each other. That's the best I can say. The reason they didn't have an interaction is because when the comic series came out involving Barrick, the issue is that Barrick did not exist yet in the game universe. He wasn't introduced. The story of Zeta Squad had not happened. So we didn't even know he was a part of Zeta in the past up until we had the Zeta story. But that is where he first met Jace, was during the Zeta Squad mission over in Olima. And when that happened, they became very close because Valera died and Jace took her place, and Barrick saw him as like, this is a prospering future Gear. Now, they don't say anything to each other because they hadn't quote-unquote met each other yet in the other media that existed. So, by game standards, they hadn't met. It's just that apparently in the comics, they just didn't want to talk to each other too much. I don't know, maybe one of them stole the last slab of bacon that was on the table somewhere. I don't know. But yes, canonically, they already knew each other and they already had a history together. They just did not bring it up or talk to each other about it in the comic series. Alrighty, going on to the next one. We have Scourge, Deadlier Than Rom, I wrote down. So this is in the second game where they're in the Hollow and they're pretty much tunneling through and talking about things. Benjamin's with them and they bring up like, yeah, Scourge seems like he's a real biggity badass. It makes Rom look like a pushover. Now, here's the dealio. There's a lot of reasons they could have said that. Again, this was just like maybe an hour after Scourge went through and was fighting Ty one-on-one, which is a feat not many can do. So that was happening. He was cutting through tanks like it was nothing. And they came to the assumption at that moment, he must be deadlier than Rom. He's making him look like a pushover. So we learn later on from the Rise of Rom comics that Rom, he was pretty much like the guy in charge of like Karn and pretty much Scourge. Now, him and Scourge were more buddy-buddy. It wasn't like, I'm in charge of Scourge. No, it was never like that. So how it goes, though, is that they both had major respect for each other, and there's been many videos on YouTube talking about it, too. It is very, very highly implied that Rom is probably the deadliest one out of anyone there, aside from Srock or Skrock or however you want to say the name. So it's kind of assumed that Rom is the more powerful. Now, again, this isn't something that discredits the games. This just happened to them when they were in that moment, so it's like, he must be more badass. Well, they were in the heat of the moment. That's the best I can say for that. Because later on, if you compare the fight with Rom and Scourge, Marcus had a little bit of an easier time fighting against Scourge. That's the best I can really say about that. I mean, if you were to honestly say which gave Marcus a bigger fight, I mean, Rom was a lot more like throwing Krill and everything, and the Krill are hard enough. Then again, Scourge was a lot more hands-on, going face-to-face with the chainsaws. I would still probably put it in Rom's court for all of that. So I would say heat of the moment, they said Scourge. I'd say if they sat back on it today, they'd say, yeah, Rom was probably a bigger problem. All right, next up, I got Asphio Fields. I prefer Asphio. That's how they originally said it to in the game, so I'm going Asphio. So Asphio Fields. So this is one where the game it doesn't really discredit the games, but there's a reason for it. So when we have Gears of War 4 and they're going over talking about everything that happened in the past, we're getting all the flashbacks in the beginning of the game, we have Asphio Fields come up. And this is where we see it was a big old battle, guns a-blazing, fighting through the UIR in order to get the Hammer of Dawn secrets. Now, that didn't happen in the books. That was not a thing. In the books, when Asphio Fields is going on, there's a major battle on the other side of the, I don't remember, I think it was a peninsula, happening over there, which involved the Navy, which involved the 26th RTI going in, so like Carlos and Marcus, that's where Carlos died. They're having the major biggity badass fight, and it's a big ass fight. Tanks and everything, things are blowing up left and right. Over on Dom and Hoffman's side, that's not happening. Everything's covert. I would think up until the end gunshots started going off. There was never a gunshot going in. They went in as quiet as possible, took down what they could, went in to get the scientists. That's how it actually went. Now, you could say, well, the games supersede the books. That is true. But when you look at it, and you look at what's in the game, you have to remember this is all happening in Hoffman's memories. Now, I've played Highbusters. I know that Hoffman is still mentally there. I know he's not delusional. I know he's not deranged. I know he doesn't have dementia or Alzheimer's. I know that. But you need to remember, for Hoffman, he's roughly 80 to 90 years old at this point. He is sitting up near the pedestal where all of these accomplishments are being talked about, and he's remembering all of it. Asphio Fields is the furthest one in his memory from these memories we see. And also, remember, roughly like 40-something AE is what we're sitting at right now. Asphio Fields happened during the Pendulum Wars. So this is roughly 40 to 50 years, roughly mid-40 years, 45 years, let's say, all the way back in his memory. He's remembering events from 45 years ago, and this man has been a soldier since far before that. I am going to chalk this up to what happened in the book did happen. That is how it really went, and I am assuming that Hoffman was just having a lot of nostalgia and romance thrown into it. So, I'm not saying anything's discredited in the games. I am saying, though, that this does take place in a memory, so you have to take a few grains of salt with what you get. Next up, we have Marcus's trial. Now, this is something that is also not really talked about a lot. Like some of these other things are very well talked about, some are not. Some people bring up the Barrick and Jay stuff, some people do not, some people don't even think about it. Well, this is another one that gets touched on now and then, but not too often. So, the Marcus's trial is that we have the book, The Slap, which talks about Marcus's time before, during, and getting into prison, pretty much. So it talks about his trial, and it does go through his trial. It does happen at the House of Sovereigns, but it's not as big and grandiose as they make it seem in the games. In the games, you have the center thing, the center area with all the pillars in it, not pillars, but all the chairs and rows going up. Marcus didn't really have it there. It was in a separate room altogether, and when they go through in the games, they bring up his trial was a sham. Marcus brings up, not how I remember things when they say, all of these things you did. So Marcus is kind of saying, that's not what really happened. Well, it is how it happened. So here's the thing. The slab was written way further back later on after the first game. The first game had a lot of things that happened, but it was the first game. They probably hadn't ironed out a lot of things. So this is one of those moments where the books are going to outweigh the game because there's a lot more proof in the books. There's a lot more things that are connected and talked about from the books. A lot more things that connect. So, for instance, when they say it was a sham, it really isn't. Marcus openly confessed to what he did. Marcus said, I did it. Like, you know, it's not like he's like, I'm not guilty and I still went to prison. No, he did it. He did. He stated he did it. Dom went in and put in his appeals. Hoffman didn't want to turn him in for it, but he did. All of this happened, and it was a very cut and dry case. It wasn't a situation of things were murky or not. Honestly, things went in Marcus's favor. Because he didn't know this, but Adam and Prescott were pulling strings to make sure he didn't just get killed on the spot and get a firing squad. No, he got prison. That's it. He was supposed to get a firing squad at the end of the day. So, no, the trial was actually not going in that direction of it was corrupt and unjust. No, it was a fair trial. Marcus admitted what he did. Everyone said their cases, and he ended up getting a much less penalty for what he did than he should have gotten. Alright, time for Road to Ruin. So this is everyone's DLC that everyone loves to talk about, but has arguments now and then. So, Road to Ruin from Gears of War 2 is a content cut. It is cut content from Gears of War 2. It is stated that this is content that didn't make it into the game. This is content that was an option but didn't happen. Now, this one I can answer for easy enough. This content is non-canon to the story. So whatever happens with Franklin, going in, sneaking in, none of this happened. None of it is canon. It is even stated by Cliff Bleszinski, before you start the DLC, this was cut from the game. It was going to, but it didn't work. We cut it out. It's not in the game. And the game is the highest level you can have. This DLC is a what if at best. So no, easy enough. Road to Ruin is not canon, but it's still enjoyable. Next up, we talk about Ragers. Alrighty, so Ragers. People want to know about the Ragers. So Ragers were a subclass of locusts that were kind of a branch off of the normal locusts and the berserkers. Kind of like male berserkers, where they were very skinny, emaciated, but when they got angry, they buffed up, got really big, and turned into mini berserkers. So it is stated in the games that most of them went extinct. So that's why you don't see them a lot throughout the games. But it is also stated later on when you go to the epilogue that why are there still Ragers here? Well, that's the thing. Not all of them were killed. The Ragers had a bad habit of getting angry and running into enemy fire and getting killed. They don't have the armor of berserkers, so they just got mowed down pretty easily. So it's stated that most of them were deployed in Halvo Bay by Karn. He was the one who put a lot of them out here. And after everything that happened, there are still a few that are alive. There are some locusts that made Halvo their home. They had a little pocket there. Some Ragers are still alive and living there. That's why the Ragers are seen in the epilogue, and that's how they're explained to still be around. There are not many, probably less than 100, but Ragers do exist still up until Adam's machine takes effect, and I don't think there's any left anymore. Next up, we got a Carmine, Fredo Carmine. So with everyone who doesn't know, Fredo Carmine, and I have covered him very extensively for the character he is, Fredo Carmine is a distant relative of the Carmine family. So he is a reporter over in Halvo Bay. For everyone who brings up this discussion, this talk, people say, well, he wasn't in the game, so who is Fredo Carmine? The survivor log, Kilo Squad survivor log, if you read that, there is a part where Fredo Carmine is conducting an interview. It is either with Loomis or is with Sophia. He is talking to them. He has his name on the article. Fredo Carmine is also confirmed, I did digging for this one, to be a distant relative. He is one of the Carmine family, just distantly related. So Fredo Carmine is canon. He is from some of the extended source material, but yes, Fredo does exist in the Gears of War universe. And now time for the main event. So this one is the hardest one I can cover on here because this one is yes, no, maybe, I don't know. It's all of that. So, and it's the most recent one too. The most recent one and the hardest is what is canon, the death of Del or JD? Now, spoilers for you. I already ruined it, but this is a spoiler portion for the ending. Who died? Okay. So this one's really hard. This one is based a lot on opinion, but there are some things out there that prove it correct. I do not have the screenshots to prove things right now. If I find anything, I'll put them up, but I don't think I'm going to find them. I'm going off of what he said, she said, and what people have shown. I have seen them, but I do not have a screenshot of it at the moment. I don't even know where I can find it at this point, but by what I can tell, by what I've gone through, by what I can see, I am, in my opinion and assumption, seeing that JD is the one who lives. The reason I say that is because supposedly there is a game guide out there that states saving JD is the correct answer. I've also heard that JD has a lot more reason to live because of his character. I do believe that a lot. I've put my case out for that. Dell is a very bland character that really doesn't have anything to contribute anymore. So it does kind of point toward JD being the one who lived. But the problem is we don't know what the correct answer is because Dell or JD are dead. And there's no fixing that problem now unless 6 has a retcon. But that's all we can say is hopefully there's a retcon. So unfortunately the answer is yes, no, maybe, I don't know. It can be any of those. Take your pick. And that's going to do it for today. I got most of them out of the way. I was trying to get this all done in one go because my camera just wants to record for 25 minutes total. So that's going to do it. Thank you guys for watching. I want to thank everyone for making this possible. Thank the patrons for making this possible. I'm glad we could clear up a lot of that and I could just get this one out of the way. We only got a few more left. I think we got 2. Well, technically we got 3, but I'm using that third one for something else at the end of the year. So thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next video for another Gear Talk. Later!